seem like they're busy.
Super
well, she retired and they asked her back. Yeah, so. I think I've done a job for her.
It's almost over. Yeah, he's a cool guy. He's a cool guy.
I don't know. It's such a waste.
Kathleen told me last time.
That's okay, I just got my hair cut. They're the second person in this room.
That's funny. Hey, I couldn't take it. Well, I see what happens in summer.
And then discuss this and then we go into non-convenience problem.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming this evening. I will call the City Council special meeting to order for March the 30th. The first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll stand and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Councilmembers Connie Williams.
Here.
Jim Garaventa.
Here.
Matt Hopkins.
Here.
Mark Clemens.
Here.
George Stegarini.
Here.
City Clerk is here. Administrator Jim Miller. Our interim engineer is absent. Attorney Douglas White.
Here.
Administrative Services Director Jennifer Callaway. Here. Fire Chief Amy New. Here. Interim Police Chief Michael Harden. Here. And Community Development Director Rochelle Cole. Here.
City Clerk's report on agenda posting.
At 11 a.m. on the 28th day of March 2017, the agenda for this meeting was posted outside City Hall for public view.
Approval of agenda. Is there anything that the council needs to add or delete? Seeing none, we'll move forward with the public forum. The public may address the council on any item of public interest not otherwise on the agenda that is within the jurisdiction of the city. No action may be taken. Matters to be addressed may be referred to city staff or placed on a subsequent meeting agenda. Speakers are limited to a 5-minute presentation. Is there anyone that would like to address the council on a non-agenda item? Seeing none, we'll move on to new business, which is a presentation, discussion, and possible direction regarding Proposition 64, Adult Use of Marijuana Act. And I believe we're turning this over to staff and our city attorney.
Before Doug begins, just let me kind of frame the evening. This is the second session that the council's held as a workshop to get public input and possibly provide direction to staff regarding what regulations the city may want to consider with regard to Prop 64. What we'll do this evening is review both the medical marijuana regulations as they exist now and the Prop 64 provisions. share with you some concerns that the city staff may have with regard to the recreational use of marijuana, the regulatory authority that the council would have if you want to establish regulations, some examples of what other cities are doing, then provide an opportunity for public input. And then if the council's in a position that you want to provide some direction to staff, then we'll certainly want to hear that. This is not an urgent measure that we need to address this evening where you have to make any particular decision tonight. If there's additional information you want, we'll certainly schedule a follow-up meeting either as a part of your regular session or another workshop. Some of the deadlines are by 2018, so we've got several months before that for many of those things go into effect. So if you feel comfortable in providing direction tonight, please do so. If there's additional information that you want, please let us know. And if you just want more time to elicit public input, then you certainly can take time to do that as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Doug White, and he'll go through the presentation materials. And both myself, Doug, and the rest of the staff are here for questions should the council have any.
And to the audience members, during the time that we're doing the presentation, because of the fact that the screen is over here on my right-hand side, if you would like to stand up so that you can see better, please feel free to do so. And also, there are some handouts up here that you can follow along with the handout.
The handout should just reflect what we're going to be going through, so just so you know, so if you don't have one, there's no information on there that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get from the presentation. Let's see if I can. There we go. All right, so tonight is a workshop for the City of Sonora. This will be the second workshop that we've conducted. We will have a public participation portion in terms of public comment period, but we aren't going to have the boards that we had last time to go over this. So this is going to be, some of this information will be a rehash of things we've discussed before in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page. For those who weren't here last time, but there is some additional new information to be provided as well. So with that, what we're going to talk about in terms of the format is we're going to talk about the legal structure in which marijuana is being looked at, both from a federal, state, and state license, as well as local license viewpoint. And we're going to look at what other jurisdictions have either done or are going to do, or have set in motion, I should say. Particularly, I'm going to focus a little bit more on jurisdictions that we represent, since we're very involved in those. And then we'll have some staff discussion on some of the pros and cons of what I'm going to call some of the major components that we're going to be looking at. And again, then we'll have public comments, and then we'll take it back to council to have discussion, and as Tim said, see if you need some more information or whether or not you'd like to provide staff with some direction tonight. Again, we're not agendized for action, so all we could be doing tonight is just kind of giving general direction on what you'd like to have come back to you. So no conversation about marijuana in California could be complete, or frankly in the United States could be complete without at least talking about the federal side of things, which is probably one of the more complicated issues, both from a legal standpoint as well as a regulatory one. And we have to start by saying, the facts, which is that marijuana is still illegal under federal law. Marijuana is an illegal Schedule I narcotic. It was not changed by some executive actions that President Obama could have taken, and it has not been changed under President Trump. As it stands right now, the banking industry is still subject to overlapping federal and state regulations. This is even if you're state chartered, you still have federal regulations you have to abide by. And illegal business expenses cannot be deducted from federal income tax liabilities. And there's some notable cases going on in the Bay Area related to that and this tax liability issue. So these are things that I would call complications. There aren't necessarily complications for the city per se, but they are complications for those who are working in this industry. Federal administration, and this will, the new federal administration's position, as I stated at the last workshop, has complicated things, I would say, quite a bit, and has changed what would have been our advice previously to what our advice is now, particularly as it relates to recreational versus medical. But Attorney General Sessions said in his confirmation hearings that he rejects the idea that America will be a better place if marijuana is sold in every corner of store. And I think one of Obama's greatest failures is obvious to me is his lax treatment in comments on marijuana. Sean Spicer, his press secretary for President Trump, said you will see more enforcement. And AG Sessions also said he doesn't think the feds have the resources to prosecute marijuana crimes in states that legalize it. So that is somewhat of a continuation of the Obama administration's position, which is that it's not a high priority and it's not something that they can go and prosecute regularly, although the Trump administration seems, at least in statements that have been made through confirmation hearings and on the campaign trail, to make a more significant differentiation between recreational and medical. Medical, there does not seem to be much of a palette to change what was the Obama, what I'm going to call largely the Obama policies. So the Trump administration seems to, as it relates to medical, have a similar viewpoint, but it does have a different viewpoint as it relates to recreational. And if you do see any enforcement, we expect that enforcement to happen on the recreational side. It is notable that states like Colorado and Oregon and Washington do allow for recreational use, and we have not seen any significant uptick so far in prosecution of those, or even them trying to do what we would call disgorgement, trying to take money that was procured in terms of taxes or fees collected from the state against these kinds of businesses and take it back to the state as being illegally obtained. So we all should know that the federal power to regulate they do have the power to criminally prosecute marijuana-related business actors, and there are certain sentence enhancements, for instance, in cultivation based off of your plant count, and they can criminally prosecute those who possess or use marijuana. So it's not just those who are in the business, but it could be the clients as well. And again, at the federal level, it does not differentiate between medical and recreational. They can also criminally prosecute bankers, lawyers, and officials, city officials, for administering marijuana businesses. They can't seize sales tax revenue from marijuana businesses, although there has been that discussion. And there's the case of what happened sometime a couple of years ago with the city of Chico, when then Eastern District Attorney General Ben Wagner brought in some city officials and told them that they'd be in trouble if they allowed businesses of this type. But
Doug, you said sales, but it says state up there.
cannot see state tax revenue, so.
So it's state, all state tax
yeah.
revenue? Okay,
Right.
not just sales, because you said sales.
I'm sorry, yeah, it's state tax revenue. And so one of the ways that they could punish a state like California, for instance, would be to withhold federal funds for state programs for violating federal law. Although, and this goes back to what's going on with some of the sanctuary cities laws, I would say that there is still some debate as to even that interpretation, and it goes back to some decisions that were related to the Affordable Care Act and so on. So I won't say that that is clear law, but I think it's a guiding principle, at least. Now to get to the less complicated part, but yet still a little bit complicated, which is state marijuana regulation. And it's complicated in part because it's still evolving. But California started off a leader, and then other states took California's spots and have taken it a little bit further, and California has followed suit. The Compassionate Use Act, which was Proposition 215, was passed on November 6th of 1996. And that was followed with SB 420, which is the medical marijuana program, which came effective on January 1st, 2004. More recently, you had the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, which we'll talk a lot about. That was went into effect in 16. And that allowed 100 square feet of growing space per patient with collective gardens up to 5 patients, and established a dual licensing structure requiring state licenses and a local license or permit for marijuana-regulated businesses. What we're here talking right here is about state statutes or state action. There's a whole lot of administrative actions that happened as well, and some guiding principles that were particularly introduced by then Attorney General Jerry Brown and now Governor Jerry Brown. In 2016, we had the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, or AMA, and that legalized possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana under state law by adults 21 and older. It legalizes cultivation of up to 6 plants indoor or personal use subject to reasonable regulation. It permits adults 21 or over to purchase marijuana at state licensed businesses or through their delivery services, and imposes a state excise tax of 15% on retail sales of marijuana and state cultivation tax of marijuana of up to 9.25 per ounce of flowers and 2.75 per ounce of leaves. There is a difference, and one has less value than the other in terms of the medicinal value. Through what's happened both at the initiative, at the state legislative level and the state initiative level, we've had the creation of the Bureau of Marijuana Control, and it's given chief authority to regulate the entire industry in California and issue commercial business licenses starting in 2018. AMA's regulatory provisions are largely patterned after MRSA, so they work in harmony together, and both the systems exist together, although one of the challenges is resolving some of the inconsistencies between the two. Business licenses for medical and adult use are distinct, and which we'll talk about in a little bit. And the legislature and the Bureau may move to consolidate these two elements, which we expect to, or two systems, which we expect to happen. And all cannabis and medical cannabis products will be tracked through the product's life cycle, very similar to what you would see in a Colorado-based model. Excuse me. So license breakdown. The state licensing authorities are currently drafting regulations for these, and so, as I said, one of the complications is we're creating law when law is still being created itself. So we're trying to do something at the local level while the law at the state level is not yet defined, although we know the general parameters of what they're going to be doing. And there are certain areas that particularly, you know, I, as your city attorney, feel much more comfortable crafting regulations as at the, you know, or city ordinances, you know, particularly when it comes to dispensaries, which would be retail storefronts or delivery services or commercial cultivation. I think as I stated last time, and we'll go in these in more detail, manufacturing is an area where I feel particularly uneducated and uncomfortable right now, and there isn't the breadth of experience and of other jurisdictions who have adopted those kinds of provisions. Testing is something I feel comfortable with, but manufacturing in particular is the one that I'm going to need some education on to better understand. So MRSA created 17 license types for commercial marijuana businesses from 6 categories: cultivation, manufacturing, transportation, distribution, dispensary, and testing. So those, even though there's these 16 license types, I think you can really boil them down and generalize them into these 6 distinct categories. And AMA creates 19 license types for commercial marijuana businesses, again in parallel with MRSA, allowing, and it allows for vertical integration, micro businesses, and large cultivators. So, would you like me to go in detail about each one of the types, or would you just kind of want to go over each of the broad categories? Well, I'll just go. So type 1 allows you to cultivate indoors only for up to 5,000 square feet or 50 mature plants. At type 1A, you can cultivate indoors using only artificial light up to 5,000 square feet. Type 1B, you can use natural light and supplement with artificial light. Type 2, you can cultivate outdoors. It's a little bit larger, 5,000 to 10,000 square feet. Type 2A, cultivate indoor, artificial light, 5,000 to 10,000 square feet. Type 2B, combination of natural light and artificial light, 5,000 to 10,000 square feet. Type 3, outdoors, 10,000 square feet. 3A, indoor, 10,000 square feet. I'm going to go a little bit quicker so we don't get lost too much in the details. Again, but I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has about.
Where's 1C?
I missed 1C? It's missing. I'll let you supplement that 1C. So maybe was missing a 1C, but grab the water real quick or else I'm going to lose my voice. Cultivate outdoor 10,000 square feet. 3A, cultivate indoor 10,000 square feet. 3B, combination natural light and artificial light on 10,000 square feet. Again, some of these are more appropriate outdoor and in other indoor, and then you have to look at our industrial space to figure out whether or not we could even accommodate some of these things. To be completely candid, I have no idea how many, and I'm sure there's folks who can answer this, how many square feet you can, I mean, how many plants can actually be grown in square feet, and it probably depends on if you use a trellis system or not, but that may be one of the questions that we can kind of have answered for those who are more in the know than me. Type 4, cultivation, up to 1 acre, no indoor or outdoor requirement. Again, we're focusing mostly on cultivation. Here's where, type 6, we get into manufacturing. Non-volatile solvent. If I remember correctly, and again, there may be folks at the audience who can correct me, I think this wouldn't be like use CO2 to basically extract the medicine or the organic compounds that are helpful out, and then manufacturing 2 using volatile solvents, which is more of a butane process, and I'm sure that there's other ways of doing it, but those are the 2 that are familiar to me. So those are, I do know Yolo County, they restricted it to non-volatile solvents. And again, this is the area where I feel somewhat weak, personally. Type 8, testing laboratories, testing only. Type 10 is a dispensary general, so standalone retail dispensaries. Type 2A, producing dispensary, a dispensary that holds up to 3 other licenses, so kind of a multifaceted dispensary. Type 11, distributor, distribution of medical cannabis and medical cannabis products from from manufacturer to dispensary. So basically, from a type 1 or 2 license to maybe a type 10 or 10A license. Transporter can transport marijuana between licenses. Frankly, if you're going to allow anything, you have to allow this, but this is mostly going to be coming from the state. This is not something that's really within the local jurisdictions to regulate as much. Type 5 is cultivation outdoor, large size, so no artificial lighting, it's outside, and greater than 1 acre. Type 5A, cultivation indoor, again large, artificial lighting, 2,200 square feet. And then type 5B, cultivation, and that is natural or artificial light of 22,000 square feet. We already went through 1 and 2. Type 10, retail or retail sale and delivery of marijuana or marijuana products to customers. So this would involve some of your delivery services. Type 11, distributor. I think we went through both of these, except for 12. Cultivation of marijuana in larger than 10,000 square feet. Yeah. So those are, I'm happy to talk about any of them in more detail that you want, again, with varying levels of personal knowledge about, of ability to explain it. But
You have more than 1 license?
yeah. Yeah.
And you can have a MRSA license and you can have a ALMA license?
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, the licenses are, at this point in time, while created, are going to be homogenized by the Marijuana Bureau. And so I don't, it will work in conjunction, it won't work separate and apart.
So regulation is coming down the line from the state that would merge these 2 into a single, or in theory anyway, that
Yeah.
would merge this all down to a single.
Yeah, and both legislation and regulations are already putting in place to marry the 2 to work together.
A lot easier to deal with, certainly.
Yeah, because there's, I mean, there's some distinctions, and frankly, right now, if you were to get it, you could, technically, you can regulate medical, personal cannabis grows, but you can't regulate recreational cannabis grows, which doesn't make any sense, but it's this nuance that comes from the initiative, which means effectively you can't regulate, personal grows. You can create, or you can't prohibit it. Let me rephrase what I just said. You can regulate it, you can't prohibit it, and there's a question as to even how much regulation that you can put in place legally.
Is there an time expectation of when this merging of the laws or the rules will be?
But things are supposed to start really clicking and taking place in 18, so this will be a very dynamic year in terms of...
So it won't be till next year?
No, I mean, I think it'll be through the course of this year.
Oh, okay.
Over the course of this year, and I'm sure that there'll still be things into 18 that we'll be working on.
Expecting to have it done in 3 months or expecting to have it done in 9 months, there's just no set.
I think they're working to get it done as quickly as possible because we have a whole system that needs to be put in place, and parts of it are in place already, but the vast majority of it's in progress.
Okay.
I mean, the shells exist. Cultivation. I think we all know what cultivation is, but just in case we don't, so I don't want to insult anybody, but I think it's important to make sure we're all on the same page. That any activity involving, and these are statutory definitions, so just so you know, I didn't write these. So if you don't like the way they're written, I apologize, but somebody else wrote them, but so that these are there. Any activity involving the planting, growing, harvesting, drying, curing, grading, or trimming of cannabis. For patient use and by primary caregiver, max of 5 patients on the primary caregiver, or less than 6 plants for recreational use. So a guiding principle that came out several years ago that a lot of jurisdictions were using in terms of regulation is they allow you to have 6 mature and 6 immature plants for personal use. That does not mean that there are not, and it's not prescriptions or recommendations from doctors. There aren't individuals that have recommendations for medical marijuana that might be up to 99 plants. And so and again, it's a gray area when you have those levels as to how much regulation the jurisdiction can have. I do believe that you don't necessarily have to allow 99 plants for personal, but so much of this is going to be new law and open to interpretation and will only be sorted out when there's actual court cases. A dispensary, which is a facility where cannabis products sorry, there shouldn't have been a comma there. Cannabis products or devices are sold, and deliveries are the commercial transfer of cannabis or products from a dispensary to a primary caregiver or a qualified patient. The primary caregiver or qualified patient definitions and terms really started coming out of then Attorney General Brown's opinion on how this should be implemented. Manufacturing is the preparation of edibles, byproducts, and concentrates. Volatile and non-volatile substances will be defined through regulations, but again, I think I kind of gave you somewhat of an idea of what they're looking at, which is, again, mostly, as I understand it, and again, there might be others who can talk about it being a little bit broader, but the method of extracting what I'm going to call today the medicine or the organic product that's needed to be able to put into a different form, whether it's a wax or an oil or butter, other forms. Transportation, the transfer of cannabis products from one license to another, and again, this is an area where I really don't know that we're going to be able to regulate at the local level because you have to allow commerce within the state. Distribution, procurement, sale and transport of cannabis, testing, analysis of marijuana products for cannabinoids, terpenes, solvents, and chemicals, foreign materials, and microbiological impurities. So the license category interactions, you have cultivation, so it starts in one form, whether it's in the ground or bake ground. It starts, and then you got to transport whatever's grown. And if it's going to be made into some kind of other substance or way of digesting. For instance, somebody who has lung cancer, you don't necessarily want in smoking, which is a common form of taking in cannabis. So a lot of medical patients, particularly cancer patients with lung diseases, will look for oil forms. Others will look for topical forms. And so this is where you get the manufacturing product comes in. That then goes into assuming that those aren't the same location again, that goes into a transportation component. And then it goes into a distribution because it has to be distributed to folks. And through that, you hope to have third-party testing to ensure, not tasting. It's not wine tasting to my knowledge yet, so third-party testing to ensure that those who are getting the end product are receiving a product that is both safe and of the potency and representation of what they're getting. And a lot of times the testing will also go into genetics. Again, then you have transportation to the ultimate retail center, where it's distributed through that, and probably it should have one underneath it. The distribution can be either through, the dispensary. I'm going to use dispensary broadly, using both as the brick and mortar, what we think of as retail, as well as what could be otherwise a delivery service that could deliver it to some folks. So this is our attempt to kind of break down how we see the licenses breaking up based off of the interactions. So cultivation, 1 through 4 under MRSA and 1 through 5 under AMA. Transportation, 12. Manufacturing and AMA license type 6 and 7. Transportation get back to 12. Third-party testing, 8. Distribution license 11. 12, again, that's a bit repetitive. And then dispensary, 10 and 10A, and retailers, 10. So what next? So you got the 10,018 regulations and licensing that we've been talking about, so there will be licensing through the states. And we're looking for clarifying changes to the law that will be made both legislatively this legislative cycle, as well as what's going to happen in court decisions. It's going to interpret some of these gray areas. And so that's what's kind of going on at the federal and state level. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with local marijuana regulation. And again, this is where there are areas where it gets a little bit dicey, and there's disagreements between MRSA and AMA. Under MRSA, for personal cultivation, jurisdictions are allowed to ban or regulate. Most of my jurisdictions did regulated until the bill came down, and with the deadline last year that would have taken away local authority and unfortunately had an artificial deadline in it. And then most folks came in and did just a blanket ban to protect their what they call Banapalooza. Went and banned it in order to preserve local control over it. But when AMA passed, it basically said you can regulate it, but you can't ban it indoors. You can still ban it outdoors because of the potential nuisance factor and other issues, some security reasons, but not indoors. And then as it relates to commercial businesses, both under MRSA and AMA, you can ban or regulate and tax. Oh, I should say, if a city bans commercial cultivation or personal outdoor cultivation or retail sales of marijuana or marijuana products, it could be that jurisdiction could be ineligible to receive state grant monies funded through the new state excise tax that takes effect January 1st, 2018. So if you ban it, then the money that the state gets from marijuana, anything that's funded through that money, you would be ineligible for receiving those funds. Marijuana taxation summary. Sales and use tax, 7.25%, and then your retail price. And again, this kind of gives you the state excise, state cultivation, local regulatory fees. It lets you know where we're currently at. That gives you an idea of the taxing authorities. There are some jurisdictions that have imposed fairly significant taxes on these businesses. I would say most jurisdictions, irrespective of what they actually charged when they went to the ballot to get taxes in place, put in place the ability to go up to 15%. And there are jurisdictions like Santa Cruz that started at 0, went up to 3%, and that number is, I think, now above 10%. So those fees have gotten fairly significant. That being said, I know one of the challenges increasingly becomes with everybody charging a lot in taxes, it starts to affect the viability of these businesses and may undermine the desire to take that out of the black market if the fees become so high that there is such a discrepancy between the black market and the businesses that it keeps those businesses essentially in the dark.
Doug, do you keep a spreadsheet or a list of all the different jurisdictions and what they charge for rates, and can we get that somewhere down the line?
Yeah, we do it. I mean, it's really evolving right now.
That's what I think.
So we keep one, but it's always a little bit out of date because this is happening so quickly. But I can give you some examples of what's happening, and I'll go through what's going on in Stanislaus in particular, and Dixon, where we represent as well, and
just be
jurisdictions that we know.
See a comparative, just to see what, even if it's a snapshot.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to circulate that. So, where are we at in terms of our local ordinances in the city of Sonora? Right now, Title 8 in our Health and Safety Code explicitly bans marijuana dispensaries. So that's the storefronts. Cultivation is banned by exclusion from permissive use zoning regulations in Title 17. Again, irrespective of what our zoning regulations say right now, I think we'd have to have a conversation about some of the personal use cultivation, and again, conversations about size of what would be allowed and where we could regulate and where we couldn't. They are treating, we do treat marijuana and cannabis consumption similar to smoking, so but it's a little bit more stringent, so it's banned in public. And the law has said that there's no problem with treating areas of consumption similar to how you would treat smoking, so that could even include how you treat vaporizers and stuff like that. So that all goes back to your code, because there is some discrepancy between vaping as a method of consumption, which is I don't know how to explain that one, but I'll let somebody else explain it who could probably explain that better. But smoking, I think we all know what smoking is: lighting it on fire and ingesting it and getting the carcinogens. And vaping is heating up, typically, I think, an oil, and consuming just the water vapor or the oil vapor as opposed to carcinogenic fire. That's my best attempt at explaining it.
Doug, as far as Ordinance 827, smoking ban in public, that's our ordinance that we ban smoking of marijuana in public.
Correct.
And also, the state law is, it bans smoking in public as well, does it not?
Marijuana smoking allows you to ban it in public, yes. Yeah. And you're allowed to, and there is case law that allows you to treat vaping, because this actually is an important distinction. Vaping is smoking if you so choose, but if you don't regulate and say that vaping is the equivalent of smoking, then I don't think that you can regulate them the same.
You had on the previous slide, you had proposed Ordinance 834. I'm not sure what that is.
that's an ordinance that we had brought to you before that we kind of put on hold pending these workshops. Yeah. So it's been drafted, you've seen it before, it's been presented to you, and the consensus was to have these public workshops before taking any kind of measures, and that kind of went to whether or not we're going to ban, or whether or not we're going to allow, and where we're going to allow, and what we're going to allow. Tuolumne County, on February 2nd, 2016, individual patients may grow up to 12 plants or as many as 24 plants for patients of the same resident, so cohabitants, outside in a fenced area or in an area of 50 square feet inside the home. Again, and I'm happy to give you some of my personal experiences as dealing with code enforcement and nuisance abatements and some security issues with outside grows in urbanized areas. January 3rd, 2017, the County Board of Supervisors unanimously passed an ordinance expressly banning all commercial activities related to marijuana, including cultivation and retail sales, and they are currently convening a working group to consider regulating commercial activity. And I believe we have some members in the audience who are actually participating in that workshop, so they would know better than I the status of that work group. Other jurisdictions, and again, most of these we represent, but Newman, they're banning all commercial activity and they're regulating personal indoor cultivation. Again, when I say regulating personal indoor cultivation, kind of setting what they deem to be appropriate limits and what would be considered appropriate for personal consumption.
But they still have, Doug, they still have to go by state law.
They do. So they can't just, there is, I will admittedly say that there is widespread disagreement amongst city attorneys right now as to how much regulation you can put on personal cultivation. I can say with absolute certainty, my opinion, and my opinion is you absolutely, 99 plants as personal consumption indoors, particularly when you have cohabitants, and so you could have 2 at 99, so you're looking at potentially 198. You can regulate that down. It doesn't have to be that high. There are some jurisdictions who have advocated making, for personal consumption, you apply for conditional use permits and go through a hearing process, have your name and address on file. That gets a little bit more questionable. There's some absolutely wonderful public policy reasons, particularly as it relates to the fire department, as to why we would want to do that, but we also, particularly when you're looking at medical issues and use for medical reasons and having to apply for a license or have public hearings, we start to run into HIPAA issues, which gives me a lot of concerns. So there's when we're talking about 6 mature and 6 immature versus 99 per cohabitant, I think there's some areas in which we can regulate and some areas in which we are not. And so while there's disagreement, we do have that ability, and it's my job as your city attorney to counsel you on when we want to take actions that may have more legal risk than others, knowing full well that there is not, at this point in time, absolutely clear direction on where those lines are. It really is somewhat of an art and a gut check as to, where we want to go and how much risk we want to take. City of Turlock banned commercial activity, and they are not regulating or addressing it, or just silent on personal indoor cultivation, which, as I said, not addressing personal use comes with its own set of challenges, in the sense that if you had, as an example, 2 individuals with the 99 plant recommendations, you could have a house with 198 plants, and is that an appropriate urban use, and would it be appropriate if it was an 800 square foot home, as an example. So I think that there's some compromises and some common sense that can kind of come into regulation, particularly since if it's indoor, you're going to have heat sources and ventilation issues and so on. City of Ceres, they've directed staff to develop an ordinance permitting commercial cultivation, manufacturing, and testing, and they rejected the idea of having at this point in time, retail dispensaries or delivery services. And Stanislaus County bans all commercial marijuana activity, period. Dixon, which is another, maybe that's on the next slide. Now, Dixon, which is another city I represent, decided to allow, they haven't looked at, we're having a workshop near in the future under some of these other licenses such as cultivation. Well, they rejected commercial cultivation. We're going to consider manufacturing as well as testing and some of the other components, but they are going to allow 2 dispensaries in town, and they are going to allow delivery that's associated with those dispensaries in town. So that's the direction that they went. What's next, local level? The policy decisions, regulate recreational or medical or both. I will tell you that we will not, I cannot in good conscience give you a recommendation as your city attorney to allow recreational at this point in time. I think we need more time to figure out what's going on at the federal level to make sure that we don't get completely sideways. If we were to allow this, we would already be allowing something that we know is in violation of federal law. On medical, I feel much, much more comfortable saying that if the council wanted to do this, that we have the ability to do it and adopt local ordinances that could satisfy council's desire. And you have the ability to do both. As it relates to medical, to be very clear, you do not have a staff recommendation to do that or to not do that. We are do not have an opinion, but again, you do have an opinion as it relates to recreational for the reasons that I mentioned before. Irrespective of what the direction is, even if it's to allow none of it, other than kind of regulate this personal use component we've talked about, we will need to look at adopting through the course of this year regulations, a potential permit structure depending on your direction, as well as changing or dealing with zoning issues, again, based off of the direction that you were to give. And with that, I want to give you some pros and cons from staff's perspective. And these, I think that these, while they are not dispositive of, I think that some of the concerns that you will have would be from staff citywide, including police and fire. These aren't just my recommendations or the city administrator's recommendations, but I don't want to say that they're dispositive of their thoughts either. They may have additional thoughts in addition to these. But potential cultivation benefits, ease of access for medical supply for patients. I mean, there is some compelling medical studies that have been done increasingly on benefits of medical cannabis. And that research is, I think it's safe to say, in its immaturity, meaning that it's very early on and we're likely to see more develop over time. Tax revenue for the city on commercial operations, so it would be a new potential revenue source for the city. It would has the potential of also reducing prosecutions for minor marijuana crimes to the extent that, frankly, minor marijuana crimes are even being prosecuted anymore because of the defenses in state law that exist right now. Most district attorneys have taken a fairly laissez-faire approach to even enforcing these crimes. So they're on the books, but not enforced that often anymore. It can help us manage land use of legal operations rather than illegal activity. So again, bring it out of the dark and into the light. And it will allow us to exercise city permitting authority so it can kind of limit the number of grows, locations, restrictions, and allow for inspections. So we know where these things are being grown. We placed restrictions on them instead of them just being done without our knowledge or kind of in the dark. And we can inspect them and make sure that they're safe, and that if there's ever a fire or a police emergency, our public safety officials would know what they're walking into. Some of the problems, it has the possibility of increasing marijuana in the city, as well as related odors, water issues from fertilizers. So those things will have to be dealt with. No clear testing of potency or consistency of product. While there is testing that's in place, I think testing is something that's continuing, it's in its infancy as well, and it's continuing to evolve, and it's a matter of getting some consistency among it and some clear standards developed. But there are highly regarded testing facilities that are out there that could serve as good models of what you would want in your community, or at least for anybody who's being dispensed marijuana in your community. It has the potential to increase crime around areas where these happen. These plants are these plants and the byproducts are highly valued, and there might be people who want to break into them or see them as sources of crime, particularly because of the banking situation and the need for many of these businesses to operate on a cash basis. So, and the significant disincentives for having them to have armed security guards. So they can have increased crime because of that, or traffic calls and 911 incidences. I do think that when we looked at some of the Colorado, and Chief would probably be able to talk more about that, when they looked at Colorado, there was a little bit of an uptick in traffic incidences and that were marijuana related. It may be something just because it was new and novel, and so it's a blip on the map, or it may be something that one should be concerned about. Increased fire and emergency risk, because I mean these businesses can be hotspots, and they are using a lot of products that if you're not doing the right growing methods could be not healthy if inhaled, if the building caught on fire or something. And there would clearly be administrative time and staff needed to administer the system and to regulate and do this right. Potential dispensary benefits: ease of use of medical supply for patients who can't grow or easily travel. I would bet dollars to donuts that right now that there are people within the community that are traveling to Harborside and Oakland and Sacramento and other places to procure medical marijuana as it stands right now, and so there'd be a compelling reason to let folks have more direct access within their own community. And obviously that goes to the second point, when they are, and again, a little bit dicey when we're talking about medical, but there's the possibility for tax revenue to go directly to the city instead of Oakland or Sacramento or other places. It allows you to manage the land use of legal operations rather than just dealing with illegal activities, because I would also bet dollars to donuts that marijuana is being distributed in Tuolumne County and in Sonora specifically right now. I don't think that's going to surprise anybody. And so, again, this would provide a method through which that could be done through a safe brick and mortar identified place, as opposed to wherever it's happening right now, which is not in those locations likely. And you can limit the locations and zoning and radius limits, so you can try to keep them away from schools or areas that we would deem as sensitive uses, essentially areas where kids congregate typically. And you get to exercise your city permitting authority, so you're going to get to limit the number, and you can make sure that the people who are operating these businesses have background checks, don't have felonies or extensive criminal histories, issues with guns or gangs, things that would be concerning, that these would be the face of illegal activity rather than the face of people who want to operate in the light.
Doug, what is the radius for schools?
Well, I mean, I think you have broad discretion to set it. It's a little bit more difficult in a place like Sonora that's fairly compact. So I would really look at the council to make those determinations as to what they think is safe, knowing your own urbanized boundaries. Oh, absolutely. You can make that decision. Public or private, not personal cultivation and personal use. We can talk about where it can be consumed. So for instance, let's say somebody lived across the street from the school. While you can require them to keep it indoors and smoke it indoors, or consume it indoors, I don't think we could say to them, you can't have a single plant because you're across the street from a school. So,
But there's no state regulation for dispensaries around schools.
there are, but I think that you can both override them and you can make them more onerous if you want to, based off of your specific findings. I would suggest they not be across the street and they not be close and they not be in places where is on the normal traffic patterns for kids. In Sacramento, for instance, and this is one of the things that Ben Wagner with the Eastern District used when he came out against a bunch of dispensaries in the Sacramento area a couple years ago. One thing is getting into the type of products that if you were to allow dispensaries, I would encourage you to look hard at, if you're going to allow edibles as an example, the type of products that are being offered in those and whether or not those products are overly tailored to children in terms of their marketing. And that was something that was used in the media broadcast and really as a way to quell it. So for instance, lollipops was a really good example, and some of the marketing associated with some of the lollipops, even some of the marketing associated with some of the candy bars. Some of them, like Bang Bar or something like that, their marketing doesn't appear to be related to children, but some of the marketing, you could say, would attract a younger audience and could be confused with common candies like Snicker bars and Milky Way, those kinds of things. So you may want to encourage or regulate and just say, not to use products that are tailored towards an audience of 18 or under. So there's ways of doing that, and we would work with the local association to kind of come up with ways in which we could do that, but still allowing kind of adult access to the things, because a lot of times it's just packaging.
So you can even regulate what forms it's dispensed in?
Yep. Again, we're talking about commercial. Right. So, and we could talk about what regulations we could put on personal, but I want to make sure I keep hammering home that differentiator. And some of the other problems would be the increased fire and emergency risk, because we have new emergency risks. Administrative time and staff to administer the permitting and inspection process. Fire department concerns, and again, this is not every concern they have. I would call this high-level concerns, and the chief is here to be able to address those, unless she ditched me. No, she's still here. The legality of the operation, it may require police department verification of legality, so a lot of cross-departmental collaboration together. And as it relates to cultivation and manufacturing dangers, the traps, electrical hazards, unsafe building modification, chemical hazards, and CO2 enrichment systems. So and I think that this applies to both, these concerns apply to both legal and illegal operations, and some of them may even apply more to illegal operations. But I can tell you that collectively, I'm going to make what I think is a generalized statement, and our city administrator can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, again, when I'm going to go back to manufacturing, that being the area where we feel least educated about the methods and processes and what would be deemed safe.
Is trap referred to booby traps or is it term for something else?
No, it's booby traps. I mean, right now, if you were to go to outdoor grow, you might find booby traps, you might find guns, you might find all kinds of things that would not be good. If it was legal, I think you wouldn't be seeing those traps. And the electrical hazards, at least on an illegal basis, I've had to personally deal with a lot of people stealing electricity, and that's more of an urban than rural problem. It's no Sonora problem versus Tuolumne County problem. I haven't dealt with it here, but I've dealt with a lot in Stanislaus County. That's getting less and less, and now people are we just know that there's really, really, really astronomically high electrical uses in some houses, and so that kind of helps figure it out. But there's not the wiring. But I will say, when you do it illegally, those typically aren't wired up to code. And so when fire gets called into these, most fire departments have a, as soon as they identify, okay, this is a grow house, we don't know what else is in, they step out and they just let it burn. So, because at that point in time, they don't know what's in.
But if they're following the law,
I think it reduces those concerns, but you're still going to have potential electrical issues because of the scale of electricity being used and power generation, but it would be significantly less than a legal grow.
I would add one more thing to this list, fire department concerns, and that would be butane honey oil production.
That gets to the,
Would
well,
that be
yeah.
a CO2 enrichment?
No, that's actually the different type. Remember when we got to the, I think I'm going to get this right, volatile versus non-volatile?
Yes,
So CO2 is the non-volatile,
right.
and maybe after I finish, one of them, maybe the association representative can come up and do a little bit of education on butane versus CO2 extraction. But one's volatile, one's non-volatile, and chemical hazards where we had butane. I particularly, from what I've heard, researched and studied and know, I have a lot of concerns with butane. I have less concerns with CO2, but I don't know that I understand it well enough to feel that I'm in a position to regulate it at this point in time, meaning draft regulations.
Right.
So as soon as I finish, maybe the association can come up and, am I saying that right?
We're an alliance.
Alliance can come up and, at least I knew it was an A word, so I just thought it was the association. So Alliance can come up and address it. Police department concerns, dispensaries, targets for robbery because they have large quantities of cash and marijuana. Again, I can't underscore enough the problems that the banking issue has created. I know that both the state and a lot of private entities are working on trying to come up with a solution, but it's still a problem at the moment. And these businesses tend to have large quantities of cash.
you guys in all cash business.
Largely, yeah, which makes accounting a little bit more difficult. It makes supervision a little bit more difficult, regulation a little bit more difficult, which is why you get into a lot of camera systems and independent verification, because there are systems that can even, you put a camera over a cash till, it can identify the legal currency, and so if there's major discrepancies between what's going in and what's being reported. So there are ways in which to do it, and frankly, the person operating the business probably has as much concerns as the city would have in terms of making sure things are done correctly. But need security systems and secure customer safety and employee background checks. I'll use Sacramento as an example because that's the one I'm most familiar with, other than the ones I've drafted myself. But they do require very detailed security plans and systems and employee background checks. It's very rare for them to allow anyone who has a felony. And there are certain misdemeanors that are excluded, particularly if that person was involved in some kind of fraud or something that would make someone leery of them handling cash or product. Inventory tracking to ensure it is not diverted to non-patients. And there's a lot of software, including software created now by Microsoft, to give you an idea how quasi-mainstream it's become. Microsoft's even creating software for inventory tracking, and a lot of the software has come out of Colorado, which has a fairly comprehensive system. I'm not recommending a trip for the council to Colorado to go tour, but you never know. That would deliveries, risk to persons delivering and to recipients' cars and targets. We do have concerns about if people are known or identified and they know that they may be carrying marijuana or tasks, we'll have crime that doesn't exist against those individuals. So we worry about their safety. We also worry about them being armed. Increased danger to patients and neighborhoods of homes are identified. So these homes that may be growing. We worry about that even on the personal side, So even on the stuff that we can regulate but we can't ban, if somebody finds out that they're growing some plants because of the value of it, there's new safety concerns because of that, and new dangers and requirements on police that have not historically existed. And if you were to allow delivery cars, I can say that we would ask that they be unmarked, and we would ask that they have GPS that could be tracked by authorities, and the recommendation has been 2 staff members in a car, a lot of this being for the safety of the individual who's doing it. And then enforcing commercial regulations could take limited resources away from other areas, and so the only way to get away around that is make the fees and/or taxes such that it could at least cover the staff resources that would be used by virtue of creating this, some kind of commercial system.
Doug, are these police department concerns and fire department concerns, are these just blanket concerns of most police and fire departments, or are these our police and fire department concerns?
I think these reflect the specific concerns of our local departments, but I think that you would find them represented by almost every department across the state. I don't think that there's a whole lot of things that I saw on here that would be different than what you would find in other cities that we represent, or any other cities across the state. I think that the one challenge that Sonora has that's different from most of the other states is it's an urbanized area surrounded by a very large rural area. So you aren't purely surrounded by other urban areas. And so access is a little bit different in Sonora than it would be for Modesto. And that cuts both ways. There's probably more marijuana being grown in Tuolumne County than Stanislaus County. And if it is grown in Stanislaus County, it's much more likely to be indoor than it is here. So I would assume in the county that there's quite a bit of marijuana that's actually being grown and consumed. So access at some level is probably decent. But that access is not at this point in time in a legal, above-the-board ways, and there are a lot of people who would like to see it recognized in that way. And so it's hard to figure out the impact of being kind of in the foothills versus, because, I mean, there may not be that much of a desire. I don't know how much of a desire there is to do commercial cultivation in Sonora, given the proximity to a lot of area which would be very conducive to outdoor growing. And outdoor growing typically allows a product that's much cheaper, but not necessarily as potent and good in quality. So I will be curious to find out what appetite there really is for things like commercial manufacturing. There might be a little bit more interest in because of the proximity. Testing is something that I think that there might be somewhat of a high demand for. In dispensaries, I have no idea, because of access being what it is right now, whether or not that would be something that's in high demand or low demand, or, I don't know. I'm sure the Alliance can give us some feedback on demand from their membership and stuff like that. That's beyond Sonora. So it's in 12. Is it Cross County?
The whole county.
Yeah, it's the whole county. So before I ask the Alliance to come up, because there are a few questions that I'm not, and issues that I think should be clarified, are there any other questions from the council for me or for any other staff? Otherwise, I'd ask the Alliance to come in and address the few issues that I kind of broached, not your public comment, but more focused on some clarification.
Any questions by the council for Doug at this time? Mark?
The Department of Justice is talking about withholding funds to cities, sanctuary cities, and perhaps the state if California goes as an entire state. Is that a recourse that they have for grants and block grants, that type of funding for federal projects to cities, if we choose to allow something that they as yet have declared themselves against but haven't shown their hand really one way or the other?
So I'm going to give you the legal answer, which is, and then I'll give you kind of like the legal art answer. The legal answer is, it is very likely within their control to prohibit cities that allow marijuana on the basis of doing something that doesn't comply with federal law to withhold money. Again, I kind of alluded to a case that was done a long time ago under Obamacare when it was first passed, that may have some limitations on it, but that's something that would need to be fleshed out and certainly was never decided and contemplated on sanctuary cities or marijuana or something expansive. It was in the context of healthcare. And healthcare is somewhat unique. So I don't know that there's a clear answer, but the conservative legal answer is you would have to go into it thinking that there's that possibility. So the legal art answer, I think it is highly unlikely, given both the statements from the Obama administration and even the statements from President Trump himself, that if you go in the direction of medical marijuana, that you will have those issues. I can't say for certain that you won't, but I think it's unlikely. I think that if you go, that you significantly raise the probability if you were to allow recreational. But at the end of the day, the likely end byproduct of allowing recreational would be the withholding of federal funds and or what we call disgorgement, which is they take all the proceeds that you got that they deem to be illegally gained and put it in the federal coffers and say you can't keep it because you weren't supposed to get it. Again, not in my estimation a likely scenario, but a possible scenario. But more than likely, if that happened, it would be you get a grant denied or told no. And again, this would not happen to just Sonora. It would be happening in multiple states, in not just California. And then we would probably rush in and do some emergency sessions and make some changes potentially. At least that would be the recommendation, and whether or not it would be at council's pleasure at that point.
Okay, and at this juncture, I'm talking pretty much about recreational marijuana. We'll just leave medical aside and say that's probably going to be untouched legally for the foreseeable future. If the Department of Justice were to start withholding funds, and my belief is from, I think, that Obamacare law that you referred to, they can only do it relative to the law and not across the board say, we're going to not give anything in any for sanctuary cities.
Yeah, that's the nuanced law that or court decision I'm talking about, yeah.
Then I would imagine that the law would end up being similar if in fact they were to do that. That we would we be able to walk it back in all probability after the fact? Say, ooh, we learned our lesson, we're going to limit it to only medical marijuana. And
again, nuanced law. I mean, the legal answer is I can't tell you with any level of certainty. The taking the legal art aspect of this, I think that there would be some warning before they brought the hammer, and particularly in this area. Even what's different here than as contrast this with the sanctuary city situation, is unlike the sanctuary city situation, we don't have several attorney general positions saying, oh yeah, no, this is fine, this is not a priority, we're not going to do it as long as you comply with state law. We don't have a litany of different guidance letters out of the Attorney General's office. Here we do, and it's a fairly recognized, I mean, they're letting D.C., blocks from the White House, they allow medical and they're not doing anything, and that's regulated by Congress. So I think this is a little bit different, and I think they'd have to give a warning.
Okay. And if in fact they were to do that, the objective is compliance and not punishment.
Correct. But again, to be very clear, I have no case law, and on the pure basis of the law, they are not required to give you notice.
Yes. Type 1C. It was mentioned in the audience what type 1C is.
I'll let the,
Or should I wait for Kira?
Excuse me, I didn't hear you.
she,
In the presentation, there was mention of a type 1C license, and that wasn't listed, and I was just wondering what that was.
Yes, type 1C is considered cottage cultivation license. It's up to 2,500 square feet. It's the smallest cultivation license that is in the legislature now.
indoor, outdoor, both?
Both, I believe.
Can you repeat the question?
I just asked whether or not it was indoor or outdoor, and she said she believed it was both. I will do a corrected version of this, and I'll circulate what a 1C is. I apologize that we missed it.
Up to 2,500 square feet? is what she
Yes,
said.
that's canopy. And canopy has to be defined by your local jurisdiction as how you measure it and what it includes.
Okay.
All kinds of fun things that need to be defined and done.
All right, now, since Kira's already up at the podium, we now need to open public comment so that she can speak, or do we not have to open public comment since you asked her to be here?
No, since I asked her to be here, we don't have to open a public comment. And again, I think there was a couple of issues, particularly as it related to manufacturing and methods of extraction, butane and CO2, as well as anything else that she wants to address, that she would probably be in a better position than I am to discuss and kind of give you a better idea of what it is.
Okay.
So for the audience and for the record, my name is Kira Tucker. I'm the Executive Director of Tuolumne Cannabis Alliance. I'm also the regional representative of Tuolumne County with Cal Growers Association. I just came back from Sacramento today from our quarterly board meeting. And just so everyone knows, Cal Growers is tracking over 40 bills that are in play or are directly related explicitly to cannabis regulation, or they are spot bills where they could later be revised and have impact on cannabis regulation. So there's a lot in play. CGA is tracking that, and as the regional representative from Tuolumne, I am closely tied into that. I have a packet I can give to you if you'd like of all the bills that we're watching.
So if you could just do the questions, and then whatever comments you would make wouldn't be part of this public comment. So
Yeah,
we can do that later.
yeah, of course. Just a brief general statement. I'm gathering a sense that there are going to be a lot of questions varied across the board, not just about license types, but about practice and about culture and about the current economy that would like to come to light that needs to be incentivized with reasonable regulations, reasonable taxation rates. And so I could talk us till breakfast. And I know there's some very informed people in the crowd who are specialists on things like extraction, on indoor cultivation, on electrical safety. There was a request for ordinance consideration, broad or specific, I wasn't sure, for the city of Sonora. And to respond to that, there really is no town like Sonora. I say that proudly. That's right. So when it comes to the idea floating around the state in the unbanapalooza that we are entering, that we can just copy and paste whole ordinances from different towns where they have things that we're interested in, like storefronts. Brick and mortar, I will say, is probably our best starting point for entering or phasing in to having this industry be incentivized to come to the light. So that's not to say we can't copy and paste certain sections from certain ordinances, those sections' intent matching our own. And so to develop our intent, I highly recommend that the council consider forming their own working committee or hosting panel talks. I am an umbrella of many consultants and experts. I can bring them in for presentations. I know there are many people who applied for the working committee for the county that, unlike myself, were not chosen, who would still like to participate in that process. I think that the 3-minute speech process is expedient, but not entirely holistic and sure. So in interest of having a better dialogue rather than a 3-minute monologue and maybe no one responds to what I have to say, or chief of police gets up here and gives their spiel and then no one responds to what they have to say, rather than it be a talking at, we can talk together through panel discussions or through a working committee. I myself have been reaching out to county law enforcement to try to provide them a seat at the table, even though they don't have a position on the committee, just so that everyone is considered. I think that's super important if our community, our micro community, is going to successfully and sustainably and safely reintegrate into larger society that we have had to reclude from. So with that intention out there, I would highly recommend moving towards putting together a panel or committee of some sort of your own.
Just for today's purposes, though, would you mind just kind of giving a brief description of the manufacturing extraction methods?
Sure, yeah, I'll do my best. Yeah. And again,
if there's somebody else,
could call maybe someone up who's better about talking about
you can call
indoor.
Else if you want on your behalf.
Could you be specific?
We talked about CO2 extraction and butane extraction. I don't know what other types of extraction they are and what that process looks like and what.
Okay, so as you know from the presentation, there are 2 types of licenses. One is using volatile solvents and the other is non-volatile solvents. So extracts come in many forms. The feared and revered, negatively revered process of butane honey oil, which has a big bad rap, is not the only way to make concentrates. You can make concentrates using the CO2 process, and that's been established by lab practices to be very safe. It's a closed loop system. There is a process using dry ice. You can do direct contact alcohol extraction. You can extract into coconut oil. You can make tinctures. You can extract what is referred to as rosin. So this utilizes high pressure, low heat to extract more than just THC or washing away and then having to re-add terpenes from a different process like butene process. So those methods are very safe, very easy to regulate. The other processes, there are labs in California and outside of California in other legalized states where they are setting the standard, being a flagship lab. One that I noted, and I believe I sent Connie an email about, was the Bass Lab in Berkeley. It looks like any other laboratory. It's not in some guy's garage, though I'm not bagging on guys' garages, laboratories. Some are really good at that. But it's safe, and it's very well regulated and secure. So, do you want to talk about any specific process or safety concerns?
If you do, can you come up to the microphone so that they can get you on TV and get it for the record?
Specifically to manufacturing? No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Okay, so with that, if council has any more questions for staff or for the fire chief, police chief, city administrator, happy to answer them. Other than that, then we should probably move to public comment.
Any other questions by the council at this time? Then we'll go ahead and open up public comment, and shall we, I know that most of you don't want to have a time limit, but there are several people in the audience that may want to speak, so we need to have some kind of limit or we will be here till breakfast. And so I would say that 5 minutes to begin with and see how it goes.
I would like to say that I would like to have it at the end after everybody else has had their say. My name is Denise.
I'm sorry. Could you come to the podium,
Who wants
please?
to speak last?
Okay, you can speak last.
It's very difficult. My name is Denise Poole, P-O-O-L, and I would like to speak, but I would like to speak last after everyone else has had their
Okay.
say, please.
All right, well,
Thank you very much.
you can do that. Okay, so I'm going to open up public comment at 6:26. And if anyone would like to come up, please line up on the side of the wall on my right-hand side, and we'll begin. Don't be afraid. We don't bite. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Jesse Kraft. I'm a Tuolumne County constituent. I like the fact that you guys are bringing this subject to discussion and considering it. It's a big topic in the state. It's a really good idea to consider dispensaries and different aspects of the industry, because allowing some form of it will allow you to collect those revenues, as you said earlier. Muchly needed revenue to help with the black market problem, which you're going to have regardless whether you allow it or not. With that being said, there is great software out there that you guys can use, and the different people that will be applying for potential licenses, given you allow them. There's great software, Seed to Sale, does all the inventory tracking, makes your job easier for regulating it, makes the police department's job easier. There's security measures and companies that really make a template that's exceeds other businesses, because it does have such a bad stigma. The cannabis industry has taken leaps and bounds over the past few years, and so it's up to you. It depends on how well you regulate it, and the applicants that potentially apply for dispensaries, you can go through them, pick the best one, background checks, things like that. So it's good that you're considering this, and it's important that you guys make the right decisions and maybe utilize a consultant even. Because like Kira said, we could talk for hours about details in different directions, but there's professional consultants out there which you could bring to the table, or some form of committee that can give you pieces to the puzzle that may be a problem 5 years from now. Because you can come up with a quick ordinance, but as everything evolves, in 5 years you may find a problem. So a consultant will help alleviate those types of problems. You could have, there's standard operating procedures, employee plans, just like other regulated businesses for the cannabis industry. So instead of worrying about these black market people and individuals that aren't able to operate a transparent and legitimate business, it's time to give them a reason to live up to the standards and run a legitimate business. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you. I was going to go into maybe some square footage canopy plant ratios. Sure. Not sure if I have the time for that, but 2 minutes? Okay, we're good. So it basically goes off of per plant or per light, and let's say one light does a 5 foot by 5 foot area, which is 25 square feet. There's many different ways a cultivator would utilize that space. You could fit anywhere from 1 plant to 16 plants in that space. So it's hard to say an exact number on average. I would say the average indoor farmer, they want to shorten the time period that they're using lights. To veg plants, you need 18 hours of lights. to flower plants to make them form into a product that can be consumed, you need 12 hours of lights. So if a guy wanted to have many short plants, you would have 16 underneath. Say this is about a 5 foot by 5 foot area. So you would go to 12 hour rather quickly, and then you can fit 16 plants in there. Now, if we were to base that on the small, let's see, type 2A indoor only cultivation license, which is 5,001 square feet to 10,000 square feet, you would roughly fit 16, let's see, 6,400 plants in there, which sounds like a large number. But that is why the state has decided to go with square footage canopy and not plant count. So it's kind of irrelevant to worry about plant count, because you could even get that number down to roughly 400 if you did one per 25 square foot space. In a nutshell, that's for indoor cultivation only. Outdoor, completely different animal.
Sir,
I think that's it.
would you like to point out that it will
Excuse me, ma'am, it's public comment, and just the person at the podium will speak.
Yeah, you can
Hold
get
your questions.
And if I could, you have to direct comments to the city council, it can't be directed to the speaker.
20 different cultivators, give you 20 slightly different answers. So,
Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah, I got some rough numbers I just jotted down
Okay,
just to help you out with.
that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
All right. First thing I'm going to do is, hope it doesn't take out my time, but I want to show you an x-ray.
You have to give it to the clerk.
Clerk here.
That is my back. Okay? Scoliosis, and it's looking at the front or looking from the back, and it's several inches out like this, okay? And just only about 3 months ago, I'm not into recreational marijuana, but I tried marijuana because of what I've heard about it, okay? I have had days where I could not even get out of bed. I have had many days where I'd have to roll and hit the floor and crawl to the bathroom. And this will last several days, okay, because of my back. Now I find that over the last 3 months, if I just take what are called 2 hits on this particular marijuana, just before I go to bed, I can go to bed, I can sleep like a lamb, I can get up in the morning, and I will not have a pain in my back. I've had this my entire life, okay? So, I haven't heard anybody else talk about cannabis, marijuana curing anything, but to me it seems like it has. In fact, I no longer have pain in the back, like I'm saying. And just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I had a pain up here by the shoulder blades. I haven't had that pain since I was like 13 or 14 years old. So I feel it's actually improving my health. Certainly if I can walk and I get up in the morning, I don't have to go through the pain and agony of just doing a stretching exercise. It's not even there anymore. Okay? I'm glad we're finally getting it in. And I think a lot of the problems people see or think they're going to see or think there is there and they're really not is because of all the propaganda, all the beliefs that people have had about marijuana. You know, you can compare it to the prohibition, same thing, okay? Especially on prohibition, you can compare it to the fact that prohibition and the outlook on alcohol is what got the mafia started before they had drugs, right? They were importing from Ireland. They're making their own beer. They had speakeasies, you know. And it's not like, you know, hospitals got drugs, right? The pharmacies got drugs. The banks have more money than any dispensary is ever going to have. And what problems do they have? None. Yeah, somebody tries it every once in a while, but do they get away with it? No, they just go a little wacko for a little time and think, oh, I can pull this off. I can go down to Bank of America and take out a couple $100,000 and I'll be home free. No. So anyway, I do this from personal experience. You've all seen my x-ray here. I only found out it was that bad 4 years ago. But as a little kid, I could not sleep without pain. I could not walk without pain. I couldn't sit without pain. Daily. Now I can. Look at me. Okay? And, you know, just as a reference, I'm actually 74 years old. Okay? You wouldn't think it, right? So I've been around for quite a while. I don't use drugs, never have. I hardly ever go to the doctor. I don't take any meds for anything. I have not taken aspirin for something like 30 years. Okay? And now I find marijuana solves the problem I've had since I was born. Basically, scoliosis. Okay? And you can see a couple of my vertebrae were actually like this, right? Try walking around and existing, sitting down and having a cup of coffee or down to dinner or pardon me, or watching TV without pain when you've got a back like that.
15 seconds left of your time.
15? Okay. The last thing I want to do, I brought some handouts here. These handouts are, I'll read the title to you. Legal Marijuana Social Impact on Colorado. It answers the questions you wanted about kids and crime and so forth, and it's actually a whole year's worth of the data from Colorado, okay? Real stats. And let's see, how many are you going to need here? 7. You can take those everything. Okay. So I have one question. Who has overall jurisdiction, the county or the state? I mean, the county or the city?
The city has jurisdiction over the city, the county has jurisdiction over the county.
But then the city is in the county, so
But we still have...
who has the last word there?
The city has the last word.
Okay. All right. All right.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So when you purchase your marijuana, how far do you have to go to get it?
Oh, well, that's interesting. I was up at the Green and Gold, okay, in Arnold, okay? And there were so many people there. There were more older people there, okay? And I'd say somewhere between 30 to 50% of the people were from Sonora.
And it's called what again?
Green and Gold.
Green and Go, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And that's in Calaveras County?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Next.
Hi, my name is Michael Tippon. I don't have as long as a speech. That was my father. And I just wanted to say I'm here because I am all for dispensary, and I think it could really improve the economy and community of Tuolumne County and the city of Sonora by itself. There's a lot of money put towards city after-school programs. I feel like our city doesn't have too much for the youth to offer. I know your concern is with the youth, them getting hold of it and getting, hooked on it. I feel like the after-school program can be part. The cannabis can provide for that school program, educate them into that is not the answer. It is solely, recreational, or it should be treated as, say, a glass of wine. Show them that, that's not the answer for their income. Show them that, we can have a youth center where they can enjoy life. And my suggestion was an indoor skate park where they can go and have a good time, do their homework, then skate. On the weekends, have competition, pro skaters, and really have a fundamental place for the youth. So have something for them to do other than, say, get high. at the same time have a good situation as far as education, have a tutor in there at, say, the recreation's expense. So it can be offered at all levels, all grades, all subjects, tutoring free of charge to all the students, as well as show them the yellow brick road. I feel like our town doesn't have the yellow brick road. I feel like there's a lot of improvement that could be happening. There's a lot of walls that could be painted that are just concrete, that our children can grow up and say, hey, I did that. I feel good about my town. You know, and when it's time for it. It's a great town. I grew up here. I've been here since '87. I love this town. And I feel like it's time for not an ultimate change, but a good change in a positive direction. And I think, you know, the cannabis can lead us in that direction. It can definitely be the source of revenue for these things to happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, excuse me. The comment about the yellow brick road, if that's a program or something, I'm completely ignorant of it. What is that?
No, yellow brick road is a sense of a path for our children to go on. I feel like there is no path for the children now. The only path they see is a new jail being built for them. Thank you.
Hopefully it'll keep them out of there.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, next.
Hello, my name is Elena Linehan. I'm here representing Project Action, which is a program out of the Amador-Tuolumne Community Action Agency, ATCA. I'm not here speaking for the ATCA board. They have not taken a stance, and they've not directed me to speak for them. So I'm not here to give you input for your decision, but rather I'm here to share information with you. Project Action is an anti-marijuana and awareness program for the youth. There's a lot of different opinions in this room, and I bet every one of us probably agrees that the law is written for 21 and older for recreational use, and that the growing brain of a teenager going through huge expansions and changes during those final few years before adulthood it's an incredible brain that's being developed, and we really need to talk about how to keep the kids understanding that under 21, this isn't allowed. I brought with me 15 copies of this booklet. It's called How to Talk to Somebody Who Uses Marijuana. We all know about peer pressure and how many kids there are out there trying to talk you into something dangerous or bad. This kind of turns peer pressure around. We have in Project Action the Friday Night Live group that are high school-age students that are drug-free, alcohol-free, tobacco-free, and they've taken it on their shoulders to develop a program to go down to junior high and talk to them about marijuana use. And this booklet was developed with that in mind. It is it starts off by saying, it happens every day. Maybe it's your mom, maybe it's the cute guy or girl at your school, maybe it's your grandfather or your best friend. How many of these kids have grandparents that are using medical marijuana and now they have access to it? So it's a how-to book written in such a way that it appeals to a child in that kind of comic book fashion, but it has really important information, like, you know, the important questions of if you use drugs or alcohol, do you do things that you'll regret later, like get in fights, destroy property, drive under the influence, which is something that these kids who are getting their licenses at the same time need to be aware of. The thing I like about this booklet is it tells them how to approach somebody. You know, again, that other sort of peer pressure. These peers are trying to pressure somebody into not doing something, and it tells them specifically, don't accuse, don't argue, don't lecture, don't moralize, and don't give up. And the thing I think about when I look at this book, which I'll have 15 copies of, so I'd love you each to have one of your very own, and take another one or two to give away to somebody. What I like about this is this book works fine for dealing with youth and marijuana. It also deals fine if somebody you want to talk to, perhaps instead about abusing alcohol or cyberbullying. It gives them a roadmap of how to stand up for themselves and how to be resilient. And one of the things that we found in our research is the best anti-drug method for a child is to make sure they have positive activities to do, that they have a goal, and that they know how to stand up and speak for themselves. And I think this booklet presented in a very approachable fashion for the youth is a good one. So as you go forward in deciding what you want to do on this subject, please bear in mind the work that we're doing with the youth, and if there's any way to incorporate that into what you come up with, your city plans or your rules. There's folks out there who want to keep the children drug-free, and any support that you can provide would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
So the Project Action is what the program is called. Is that part of Friday Night Live?
No, it's developed specifically by us. Behavioral health, in anticipation of the law that was the passage of the Proposition 64, I believe. They went to the community and asked for a community agency to develop a program that would address youth and marijuana issues. We applied for it, we got that, and we developed this program where we have teenage students going and talking to the junior high students. Because I'm 62 years old, they're not going to listen to a word I have to say. They'll say, yeah, right. But when their own friends, the people that they look up to, come to them and say, I'm drug-free, here's my choices, here's a way that you can stand up for yourself and deal with a friend who you think is harming themselves because they're getting into drugs, alcohol, tobacco, whatever dangerous activity that might be. So this is strictly homegrown. This is something we developed there at ATCA under a grant with behavioral health, specifically looking at the youth and trying to keep them safe and healthy and happy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Are you taking this message to the individual schools?
Yes, the Friday Night Live students have kind of brainstormed which schools they would approach. Let me start over again. They brainstormed which students they would approach first, and they're working with the school counselors. And what we want to do is do 3 schools this year, 3 more schools next year, and all the schools the year following that. We've got a 3-year grant, and we hope to be able to establish this program so it would stay and just continue on. High school students going to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. So the message is for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, delivered by the 9th through 12th graders.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, next.
Hi, my name's Curtis Reese, and I'm just up here just to kind of finish what this first gentleman was trying to say. He kind of ran out of time about plant number, and the district or the city attorney is struggling kind of with how he feels about plant numbers. There are two parts of the industry that these plant numbers would affect, and that would be the people who provide clones for the people who grow, and also breeders who deal with research and development of new strains, which rely on selection of plants. So the plant numbers.
Clarify the term clone.
Pardon me?
Can you clarify the term clone?
Clone. Okay. When a branch, okay, clones. They deal with female plants a lot.
Give them an opportunity to answer.
And so a clone is a reproduction of a plant by itself. Instead of using sexual reproduction with seeds, you'll cut a plant and root it. So it's just like they do a lot of the horticulture industry works with clones. It's an exact replication. It comes from one plant, and then you can reproduce. So since cannabis has so many different varieties, let's say, that have different effects, when you find a plant that patients like, or a certain type of medicine, you can reproduce that same plant over and over and over. And so the people who deal with clones, as far as for dispensaries, people will buy clones to grow their plants already a female, and they don't have to go through this big old horticultural process. They require large numbers for selection, and in fact, that whole industry they don't even grow plants full term. They root them. But as soon as you remove the tip of a branch from a plant, it's considered a plant by law. Okay, it can have no roots on it or nothing, and it's still considered a plant. So even before it is a plant, I mean, it wouldn't even survive on its own until roots have come out. Just like taking one of your favorite plants and taking it, cutting off and sticking it in the water and watching it root and then planting it. So those two people, those and plant breeders, will be directly affected by plant numbers, limiting plant numbers. And there's all kinds of different indoor, like the first gentleman was getting into, you know, you can fit 50 plants in, you know, in just a little tray right here, if they were clones. That would be considered your number. So if we can just get away from the plant numbers and go to canopy size, that's just an easier way of dealing with that, since you're in the infancy of trying to figure out what's going on. And that's all I want. I just wanted to kind of clarify with that. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see anyone else lined up to speak, so I believe there's one lady in the audience that would like to come up and speak at the end. So would you come forth, please? Is there any way we can get a microphone? Probably.
Mary Jane's microphone.
You are beautiful. I need a card from you.
Come over here.
Thank you very much for accommodating me.
You're welcome.
I didn't know you had a back door that came in off the main street. I actually came up your stairs.
Well, we should probably put a sign out front to let people know that, but I bet there is one.
Yes, but I came in on Washington Street because
Yes.
that's Main and that's where it says City Hall.
Well,
I'll have you know that I'm in a wheelchair. But I don't use a wheelchair because God gave me 2 legs to walk on. And as long as I can walk on these 2 legs, I'm going to walk on these 2 legs and only use a wheelchair to sit in.
Good for you.
My name is Denise Jean Poole. Jeannepool. My address is 8937 Highway 49, the Golden State Highway. Highway 49, Sonora, California, 95370-8020. I have lived on that property now for 25 years. I have raised 4 children on that property, all of which are grown. My youngest one just turned 18 September 10th of last year, and she is now an adult. She is the saddest case of my whole. She is a wonderful, wonderful child, but she's the saddest case of the whole thing, and I can't talk about her right now. I'm going to talk just briefly. That young woman from Atka, my youngest son, works through AmeriCorps for the mentoring program with the director of the mentoring program. I first got him into the mentoring program when he was young because I wanted him to have a positive role model. I'm just giving you very brief glimpses, okay? I can tell you that I've been a California Department of Forestry firefighter in 86 through 88. I stopped my career with the California Department of Forestry that had then delineated to California Department of Forestry and Firefighting in 88 because I found myself pregnant with someone who decided, who I knew was going to abandon me as soon as he found out I was pregnant. It's neither here nor there. We all have our own walks with God. And that's, it's okay. I have a beautiful, beautiful son. My firstborn is heaven. And he's been through so much. My son, my children, when my oldest son was in 7th grade, found my neighbor, basically a parent, their parent, hung in the barn right next door to us, between his house and my house. And they, at 7 o'clock in the morning, they came in at 7:06 that morning. And they still had to go to public schools, all of them. All of his 4 children and my 4 children had to go to public schools and pretend to be normal children And the public schools continued to expect them to be normal children through all of that. My kids suffered traumatic, catastrophic fire at that residence after that. Or actually, it was before that, because he and his wife and their 4 children helped me through my catastrophic fire. Excuse me, I had made that brief misstatement. The fire happened before. The fire happened August 4th of 1997. I had just graduated with my 2nd degree from Columbia College. I was going to go back for another year just before going on to UC Monterey. I had decided between UC Humboldt and Monterey for my graduates. I've never finished my graduates, although I don't need to go to school to finish my graduates. I'm a scientist.
One more minute.
Okay, I'm a scientist, chemist, physicist, astronomer, you name it, I'm a scientist. I'm also a lawyer, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. I know medicine backwards and forwards. Dr. Steve Acuna is my doctor. He's been my PCP for over 30 plus years. Jan Black is my personal behavioral health specialist and my whole family's personal behavioral health specialist for 20 plus years. If you don't know her name, you should. She's one of 3 people that have been able to testify in court on all kinds of child and adult cases. What I want to say about marijuana is you guys have an opportunity, like she said, there's no place like Sonora, anywhere, ever. And you guys have an opportunity to be state of the art.
Okay, time's up then.
Please do so. I have a couple cards to pass out. Green Gold Cultivators and Lake Virginia Country Store right down the street, my neighbors. There's 7 of them for each of you.
Thank you.
Please do the right thing. I'm more than willing to sit on any committees that you're willing to have me. I'll be 60 this year. I've done a lot.
Thank you.
I'm willing to do more. It's time for me to do more.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing me.
I'm going to ask one more time if there's anyone else that would like to speak before I close the public comment.
Sorry, Ms. Poole, I know you wanted the last word, but there are a few things I just wanted to go over real quickly. There are a number of studies, and I will CC your whole council and yourself as well, regarding public safety, in particular around storefronts, around brick and mortars. There's one from UCLA, funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. They analyzed 2 types of crime, violent and property, in areas with varying concentrations of dispensaries. What they found was that while factors traditionally understood to lead to increased crime, for example, large percentages of land zoned for commercial rather than residential, a high percentage of one-person households, and the presence of highway ramps, and a higher percentage of the population ages 15 to 24 were positively associated with crime in those areas. The density of medical marijuana dispensaries was not associated with violent or property crime rates. In conclusion, the researchers said, these results suggest the density of dispensaries may not be associated with increased crime rates, or that measures dispensaries take to reduce crime, such as doormen and video cameras, may increase guardianship, such that it deters possible motivated offenders. So this brings me to highlight the newly formed, kind of preemptively formed security companies locally that want to lend their allied help in business to dispensaries or to cultivation sites, to distribution centers, to transporters. Those people are already thinking proactive and ahead and in consideration of these very important public safety issues. So I did want to turn you on to that. Youth access, there's studies. I'm sorry, I have so much to share with you. There are studies, actually, describing a plateau or decrease, depending on the area of the study, in youth access or youth use of marijuana. The example of alcohol shows that it is possible to make it difficult for minors to buy directly from licensed stores, and that doing so reduces alcohol consumption and alcohol-related harms in the target population. I've found, in my experience, that dispensaries often have way more rigorous protocols for checking ID and for doctor recommendations than bars and liquor stores have. I can personally attest that my first drug in high school was alcohol. It was very easy to access. So I just want to share that with you, that it can be done in policy, and it can also be done in vetting certain businesses, dispensaries who have business plans in place to utilize security companies, to have operational procedures, trained and vetted staff. This can all be tightened down. It doesn't have to be gray market anymore. We can get very, very specific. Santa Rosa got very specific. Oakland got very specific with their dispensary laws. There are lots of things to look at and to evaluate intent and how it can relate to Sonora's needs and intents. And again, copying, pasting a whole ordinance is not recommended. I would like to respect the unique characteristics, needs, and values of Sonora. And so again, having a council or panel or working group, TCA is happy to assist, bringing in people of great knowledge in the industry to help with this process. We can go through a lot of different draft reviews and even put it to the public. We're happy to field any questions, any concerns. Our website's tuolumcannabis.com. Thank you.
Kara, would you come back up? I think there's a question.
I did have a question. I know you're on the county's ad hoc committee. What's the status of that? Have they met?
We have not met. The meeting date is April 12th. I believe 1:30 p.m. I have to check my iCal. But April 12th is the first meeting date. We should be given a proposed timeline and goal set, I believe. That was coming from CRA. So that is the big reveal.
And I assume it's in the board chambers?
I assume that as well. They haven't told me. I got a nice congratulations letter. But that's all I know. Great. Any other questions?
I have no idea where the county is or isn't. Is this a blue sky committee where everything's open, or have they given some direction, or do you know anything?
Again, everyone is speculating. No one knows what specific direction. I know that in past talks we've, like today, seen presentations on all license types. I might even be so bold to suggest that not all license types need apply for the area of Sonora based on available land, zoning, acreage, parcel size, proximity to various sensitive use zones as can be defined by your council. But the county being a larger, more agrarian, more rural environment, I know that cultivation is something that is of utmost. And that's for production and or nursery. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it's a task force that's been set up, so you understand that, okay?
Yeah, and it is mixed. There's 2 supervisors, myself as an advocate. There's a retired CHP officer, and then Jerry Baker from planning. So it's mixed, but it's small and nimble, and that's probably prudent as well if you want to put together a committee.
And it's a public meeting.
Yes, Brown Act. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
One quick sentence.
You've already spoken, so I'm going to have to cut you. So I'm going to have to, if I let you do that, then I have to let everybody have one more sentence.
I
So,
just want to say that I would not make it up here without marijuana.
Okay.
Make it up the stairs.
thank you.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to hear, pardon me? Well, this is, okay, once in public hearing. Well, unless you say staff isn't public hearing.
Staff is not public.
Okay. Hold off.
Okay, all right. Then I'm going to go ahead and close public comment at 7:05 and bring it back to the council.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to hear from our chief of police and from our fire department in regards to the information that was presented to us. Do you agree with it? Is it something you need to add to, take away from?
Mayor Williams, members of the council, Mike Harden, your interim police chief, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to at least offer a few comments. Let me just first state that on November 8, 2016, I voted as a citizen in the great state of California, not as a police chief. I had no design at the time that I would be leading a municipal law enforcement agency, and I was happily retired. Now that I'm given the awesome responsibility to lead the city, both the men and women who make up the police department and the community members who live here, I take that responsibility very, very seriously to keep them safe. I don't expect to get a rousing round of applause after my comments, but I will tell you that in my 35+ years in law enforcement, I've seen the destruction caused by drugs, all types, alcohol included, on families. If you strip away the layers of what, the people that we deal with in law enforcement, if you strip away the layers of the causation of domestic violence, of property crimes, of violent crime, at the root of it all is substance abuse of all kinds. So my comments are offered as a police chief of seeing the real life impacts of drugs and drug addiction on members of our society. Is it reasonable to conclude that we will expect increased calls for service at an outdoor grow? Absolutely. Is it reasonable to conclude there will be trespass calls? Absolutely. Is it reasonable to conclude that there will be robberies because it is a very high value cash crop? Absolutely. And you're dealing, and I'm dealing and leading a police department that, quite frankly, is very, very thin. 12 members tasked with the responsibility of keeping this community safe. So I want that to be considered as part of this discussion. Also, I think the discussion gets blurred sometimes. The gentleman who got up with the scoliosis issue, right here. What we're considering tonight is not impacted by this discussion. The Compassionate Use Act passed in 1996, Proposition 215, allows for marijuana use and consumption by persons who are in medical need, or and even grow and provide if you're a primary caregiver. So what we're considering, his issue is not impacted by that. I understand that they get blurred sometimes. I understand that it's a confusing state of the law and there's lots of moving parts. I get that, but that law's been on the books for a long time. If you presently have a doctor's recommendation, you can consume and use marijuana for pain relief, stimulate appetite, whatever the case may be. I've seen that entire paradigm shift. From when I started in law enforcement, I could arrest people for simple marijuana possession, put them in handcuffs, and take them to jail. And I've seen it morph into a citation offense only. And and I'm willing to accept that there's changes now. My job as a police chief is to carry out the policy, the mandates of the council through the city administrator, and I'll do that to my very best ability. But I've seen the impacts of drug use and what happens. In a study that I found just today, and this probably conflicts with what she said earlier about Colorado, as a result of marijuana legalization in Colorado, there are now, or in this study that I found in 2016, 424 retail marijuana stores in the state of Colorado, and only 322 Starbucks, and only 202 McDonald's. Marijuana traffic deaths increased 48% in a 3-year average since Colorado legalized recreational marijuana compared to the 3-year average prior to that. Youth marijuana use increased 20% in the 2-year average since legalization compared to the 2% year average prior. Emergency room visits increased 49% in that same 2-year period. In 2015, the Denver Police Department alone saw crime rose in every neighborhood in the city. Every neighborhood in the city. The murder rate hit a decade high. There were 1,059 more cars stolen. There were 903 more broken into, 903 more auto thefts, 321 more aggravated assaults, 231 more homes broken into compared to 2014. Can you attribute that solely to marijuana recreational use? No, but it's the only variable that changed. What else changed in that community or in that state? The Denver Police Department is dealing with a 900% increase in the unlawful cultivation and manufacture of marijuana concentrate, and a 99% increase in the unlawful distribution of marijuana and marijuana concentrate. The quantity of illegal marijuana seized by the Denver Police Department increased 3,424% on average per case. The volume of marijuana seized per case has increased from an average of 162 pounds to 5,724 pounds. I'll carry out the wishes of the council to the very best of my ability, whatever you choose to do so. I'll just tell you that a more profound, prolific, available drug use in our community, in my opinion, my professional opinion, is a recipe for disaster.
Chief, do you have any idea how strict their laws are over there in regards to?
I didn't do a side-by-side comparison, but I do know that Colorado is probably the standard bearer by which states are looking at with respect to legalization of recreational marijuana and dispensaries.
Washington's another state that legalized at the same time. I was wondering if you had...
I don't have those studies.
And so is Oregon. And so is Oregon.
Yeah, and Oregon as well.
All right. In your professional opinion, are you essentially saying that we will need more police staff to deal with wider legal usage?
I'm saying that absolutely is a most certain outcome with this, no question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our fire chief?
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. Apologize if my voice goes in and out. I kind of got a sinus cold going on right now, so that's been me coughing in the background, so I apologize. I echo the sentiments of our police chief as well, although the dangers and the concerns for the fire department are a little bit different. I do have concerns of our short staffage that we have as well on increased calls. I think with marijuana, people that aren't familiar with the drug, there has been increase in overdoses because you can overdose from smoking too much, and so I see an increase of EMS calls for the fire department to respond to. I did put together comments as well as what the city attorney had provided. I did include those honey oil concentrates and the vital ways that they can get that concentrate out of the drug. There's been several firefighters injured and killed from explosions from people manufacturing that don't have expertise or did something wrong. Fire department gets called out and there is secondary explosions that put our safety employees at risk. Also, depending on the acceptance of marijuana in the community, we do know that it goes on illegally and there are illegal grows, so worried about response of my safety employees of going into a house where they don't know what's involved in there. I put down a few things that electrical fires, because marijuana grows take some upwards of 10 times the amount of electricity that a normal residence does. So amateurs that have grow sites have fire hazards because they overload circuits from lights, fans, heaters, ventilation systems. If they obviously don't get a permit through the city, if that is a process that you choose to put in place, it poses risk to firefighters, causing arcing, fires, explosions. And the indoor hash oil production, as the mayor had mentioned earlier, those are used with butane, natural gas, propane, power carbon dioxide generators to help grow the plants faster, booby traps, and those don't distinguish between a resident, the property owner, a police officer, or a firefighter. So it really does pose a lot of threats and concerns to our safety and our community. There's also been the talk, and it was mentioned briefly, but the use of pesticides, whether it's indoor or outdoor cultivation, fertilizers and chemicals used, if a structure catches on fire, our firefighters now and the occupants and their surrounding community is exposed to whatever's burning. So lots and lots of different things to consider on marijuana. And again, I would I would echo the sentiments of medical marijuana, that that's already been passed and that's not affecting the decisions on how we move forward. But my recommendation would be not to allow it.
Question, have we seen any of this illegal activity when you go out on any kind of a fire?
I would have to talk with the captains, but they've smelled it more than seen it. But the calls that they've gone on, they've seen people that have been under the influence of some type of narcotic. They're not experts on what that might be, but I think the odor that is given off by marijuana is pretty common knowledge to those that have been around it in police and safety. So yes, they have seen it. So my concern is there's so many houses that might have illegal grows that we don't know about. The neighboring county that is allowing cultivation, legal or looking at allowing cultivation, I think they've issued some licenses in Calaveras. There's human trafficking for work. There's all kinds of things that come with that. And I think that Sonora is a unique place, and it is a community, and we're trying to brand it as some place that we want people to come to. And I just don't think this is the way and the route that we want to go to make this community better. So, just.
Question. I have a question. The CO2 enrichment systems, can you explain how that's, what is, obviously the volatile ones can explode, the butane.
Right.
The CO2, how is that a danger?
So CO2 levels, obviously if it's a CO2 enriched environment, it's taking the oxygen out. So depending on who's in the household, if you have a family living in a structure, the residents aren't set up to have agricultural grows. If they have some type of environment where they are raising the CO2 levels to increase the plant growth, which is common in marijuana grows, they're reducing the oxygen level for the occupants. And if you've got small children in the house and you're not knowledgeable of what's going on, that could cause an issue as well. So.
All right. I was thinking of some sort of explosive type of situation. But
both. If they use the generators with propane and butane, with heat and everything to raise that. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yes.
So your recommendation is against licenses for medical?
No, the medicals aren't in. What I was reiterating was what the police chief had said. That's not the decision the council's looking at and moving forward isn't regarding medical, because that's already been passed. It's the legalization of recreational. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you have another question?
Anything else?
Yes, I do. Okay.
We'll both cough.
I would think that permitting, everything that you were listing as hazards for the fire department personnel are pertinent to illegal grows, almost by definition. Would permitting not deal with a lot of those issues? One, you would know where they are for the legal ones, but secondly, in order to pass the building inspection, for example, they'd have to have the electrical adequate, they would have to have proper ventilation, it wouldn't be...
It would depend on what regulations were set, correct, yeah.
But it's something that legally would be defined and per our wishes to, I mean, if we want to say, well, lest they fail, allez-y, then that's one thing. But if we wanted to be responsible, then that would take care of a lot of those issues, should we come to that point.
I would hope with input from staff, if the council chooses to move forward, setting strict regulations on that would definitely help with those items. For those who don't come in and get a permit, and haven't, it doesn't.
Well, it's not going, that's not going to change anyway. I have another question for our council, if germane to this, and that is, what is the punishment, or what are the statutes for people who have the option of being legal, but then continue to have illegal grows that don't meet codes, are they felonies or misdemeanors? What happens then?
It would depend on the nature of what they do and the potential crime. Again, one of the most common has been stealing electricity. It's a little bit different when there's a building permit violation. So, for instance, police get called out because there's a fire, and we stumble across it and we have building permit issues. Typically, then it's confiscation of the equipment and destruction of the plants. Depending again, and then it depends on the circumstances.
Okay, and the DA probably. What about booby traps? See,
booby traps, absolutely, because you'd be endangering stuff. So they'd be looking at felonies and so on. It depends on the nature of the booby traps. It depends on if you have firearms present during this time. So there are a lot of factors that go into it. I would say the larger scale the production, the more violations you have, or the introduction of firearms or other narcotics, the more likelihood we're dealing with a felony, and the more serious the felony would be.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, and the last thing I would comment, as the police chief said, you have 7 full-time firefighters in your department. That's it. And there's only 2 on, and then myself, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 at a time. So increased call volume is definitely going to have an impact on our staffing. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments at this time by the council?
Am I out of line if I ask Kira to elucidate on a question that I had? She was called by council already as sort of an expert witness.
See, Councilman, you have the ability to call in and you can ask them to clarify your question.
Kira, you're a great spokesman for this issue. If you would maybe explain a little bit about what security for these type of all-cash businesses would be and how they deal with it. Because if one has firearms being an issue for other felonies and creating higher limits, and yet one has a cash business with maybe 100 to 500,000 routinely on premises, how do they deal with that safely and responsibly?
So again, I'll point to the idea in play in other states and also within California currently at dispensaries. There are security teams who are trained and licensed to carry a sidearm and who have hybrid knowledge of police enforcement, military backgrounds, and knowledge of the cannabis industry and safety when it comes to transporting goods and cash. Something that I have a press release that came out on the 27th about the California Growers Credit Union, which is forming to help deal with the issue of banking specifically, not necessarily actual transportation of cash. Again, I would refer you to the security team idea that you can specify in your regulations of a dispensary. It could be written into your transportation license that they be contracted with or actually be a security company that can qualify for the transportation license. But the credit union model has been working successfully in Colorado. The California Growers Credit Union is actually parroting Partner Colorado Credit Union. You can check out their website. They're very well established. It's a way to get certified by the state and via federalism avoid the federally insured requirements that are passed on to banking, traditional banking system. So credit unions are a way to mitigate the banking problem.
I've forgotten the name of the product itself, the electronic currency that...
Oh, Bitcoin.
Is that being used at all, or...?
I mean, I think people are using it, but is it something you can regulate and put into play?
The whole purpose of Bitcoin is to avoid government being in charge.
So here's the deal. Here's the intent. The intent of regulation is to get out of the habit of looking for loopholes and write specific, explicit, black and white, borderline, categories, specifications to bring this industry out of the shadows, out of hiding, into the playing field with any other business type, whether you're growing apples or you're selling coffee. I'd like to be able to legitimately pay at least my state taxes. The feds, we will contend with them over the next several years. I would like fathers to not have to lie about what they do for a living for fear of public scrutiny. I would like for doctors to not be run out of town because of their compassion for writing recommendations for patients. And that has been all those examples specific to Tuolumne County. I'd like to see fewer embarrassing court cases regarding marijuana with the drafting and approval of strict regulations.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, we as a council need to give direction to staff on where we're headed with this. So would any of you like to start a comment regarding what our next step should be?
I'd like to say something if I could, Madam Mayor. Everyone's perspective here not only is very respectful tonight, and I really appreciate that from everyone. Again, I was here in, I think it was 2011, and it was a completely different story. Everyone needs to know that this council has a very open mind. Again, I was here in 2011. I see the difference. I guess I'll just start off. I've had friends that have died of drug overdoses, substance abuse, 2 heroin, 1 cocaine. You hear, I've been approached different ways. Oh, the gateway drug is marijuana. No, it's alcohol and prescription drugs. Prescription drugs are very readily available. That's why we have these, get rid of leftover prescription drug days. But again, I've never touched marijuana, don't ever plan on it. I had the stepfather and now the mother who has rheumatoid arthritis, and that's how she deals with her pain in not taking Norco and other prescription drugs. I couldn't agree with law enforcement more when it comes to substance abuse. So again, understand where I'm coming from. I'm looking at this as a different perspective. We have a really big position, I think, to be a leader, I think, in the state of California when it comes to this issue. And I think many people are wanting to come to the table, and I think it's great. I'm not for the recreational use of marijuana, so you'll never get that out of me. But again, there are other benefits. There are people that suffer with all kinds of ailments, and I think now we're starting to see that cannabis oil and others, without smoking it and getting high, does have many benefits. So I'll throw that out there. Quite frankly, my opinion, after talking to many different users, non-users, and what have you, is that, a decent amount of regulation in the city when it comes to dispensaries, I think would be good. I think 3 dispensaries might be good, just because, 1 turns into a monopoly essentially, and 2, a lot of times they can mirror each other. But then again, 2, we can oversee 3. We only have 3 square miles in the city. We can oversee 3 easily. That's my personal opinion. When it comes to that sort of thing, I'd like to hear more from law enforcement because they'll be reacting. It's not the people setting up the dispensaries that are going to be causing issues. It's not those people. It's going to be people thinking they can get something for nothing and robbing the dispensaries, that sort of thing. It's like stealing alcohol from, say, Walmart. I mean, it's right there, and then they go out, get drunk, get in a car, behind the wheel, what have you. And I don't know, maybe, I'm getting head shaking or what have you, but my opinion is 3 dispensaries, but again, a regulated way. The state passed a law, we've got to do something. We can't get away from it. It's like other political arguments we can have. if we all sit at the table, we might not all get what we want, but at least we can be on somewhat of an understanding of one another without bashing one another. I think that's all I got for this second.
Okay. Mark, would you like to go next? Or do you have anything?
I wouldn't mind waiting for some of my wiser and better patriots up here to go first, so I can go, would prefer I did.
Would you like to go last? Anyone else?
George?
Yeah, I called on our chiefs, and I suspected prior to their giving their comments, what the comments were going to be. And I guess I'm old school when it comes to this issue in particular. And so I'm coming from a point of view, I think, that is probably not an open-ended situation for me. On the other hand, I've talked to young people. Anybody under 45 is a young people to me. And they've got a very different perspective on this issue than I do at this point. That being said, I think forming a committee of some sort, Mayor, to look further into the issue, I would have no objection in doing that. And I'd probably base my final opinion on the outcome of that committee.
Yeah, I don't think that, I agree that we should go ahead and form our own committee. I don't think we can really make a very strong decision tonight based on just what we've gotten so far. I mean, there's so many variables, both from the state end, from what the feds are going to do. But I have input from all the different areas. I know I've got relatives who actually are in some of the growing areas, and then I have people that say you should ban it, and all across. And I'm probably sure that we all have that, from one extent to another. But I don't think we're ready to either go to one end or the other right now. I think we need much more information, and I think the idea of creating a working committee similar to what the county is doing now is a good option for us. I think that there are different variables that we would be different from the county in that, and I think actually Kira touched on it in part, is that the county is such a wide open rural area, and we're more urbanized than anywhere, and that there are areas where we would be stronger or weaker in, and the county the same. And perhaps there's some sort of synergy between what the city and the county could end up doing regarding this issue. But I think we only can explore that through an ad hoc committee of our own. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Mayor, for your indulgence. I believe the idea of the committee is a very good one, and in part, I will be candid as to why. My ignorance on this issue is such that I'm not certain I would recognize the smell of burning pot. That did not, nevertheless, dissuade me from voting for the proposition, because I believe one is in charge of one's own person, and that it is probably no more onerous than alcohol, which causes lots of problems. At the same time, as soon as we're going to start crafting ordinances, if we choose to, I think we need to take the experience and and input of our police and fire chiefs very, very seriously. My fear is that at best, all these taxes that we're looking forward and new revenue will hopefully just barely offset additional costs. And it's an area where we need probably more study. I believe that it's premature to ask staff to do very much of anything as far as preparation and using staff time. They're pretty busy with some other issues right now. And the other reason that I think that more deliberation and looking at the problem is important is because while we have our attorney's best opinion, we still really don't know where the Department of Justice under Sessions is going to be going, because just because other administrations have elected to ignore the law does not mean that they will. And I want to see how it goes with sanctuary cities and the types of leverage they use and how they go about doing so before we really commit to something, even if we probably would be able to walk it back. Personally, I don't think that we would benefit in this particular area by encouraging or allowing cultivation in the city limits. We have huge amounts of property that's better located and more ideal for it outside of the city. Perhaps dispensaries, when the time comes, would be very appropriate. The testing, I don't know much about the manufacturer and what's involved. I am inclined to believe that the proper regulation would make it a much safer, better controlled, and, well, just proper production controls, and we would want to craft any ordinance so that safety of both the community, the employees, and the end users would all be taken into account. And on that note, I'll hand it over to our mayor and figure that I've probably talked more than I should have already. Thank you very much.
You're fine. What I'll say is, I think we should start with state law and what, as the platform to begin our conversations. I think we need to review ordinance. Along with this, review Ordinance 834 that we put on hold. I believe that we need I would like to hear more as far as what our police and fire department have encountered maybe in the last year to do with marijuana. I'd like to also hear from our police and fire department as to the type of regulations that they think that should be included in an ordinance. And then find out the information from CHP, which is my understanding from what I've read that the CHP is who's going to be developing the protocols for driving under the influence. So I'd like to know more about that. And I think that from forming a ad hoc committee, that all of that information would be helpful to us in crafting what our ordinance should be. Regulation is probably is my top priority, because if we regulate things correctly, then we are hoping and it won't be 100%, but we are hoping that if we regulate things correctly for our city, that it will be a safer city. So regulation is very important, and that's why on this subject matter, I mean, if we could regulate, get rid of alcohol, drugs, and all of it, wouldn't that be wonderful? But that's not going to happen. We've seen that in the past. So we need to have regulations that we can enforce and be able to those who have a doctor's prescription for medical marijuana, that they're able to utilize the product. But from a recreational standpoint, I want to make absolutely sure that we as a city protect those people also that have no need or want or desire to ever utilize this product. So those are my comments, but I think that's the beginning. That's where I would suggest that we start. And then the last thing would be, if we're going to put together a committee, who would be on that committee? So I need to get some input from the council on that also.
You could get some general display of interest and idea who might participate, we could not, we're not agendized as an informal committee tonight. So we have some discussions on it, but we could not take any action tonight.
Okay.
Well, I'd be interested.
Yeah,
Okay, Jim?
It looks like Matt is
very
too.
interested. Yeah, my schedule's still wide open.
Okay. And then from the audience, we have one lady that, it's Diane, right?
Denise.
Denise that's interested. Okay.
It's what my uncle used to say.
Denise.
Madam Mayor,
You want to have them?
Really picking right
I
now.
would probably prefer to do that when we actually agendize it, because there might be other people, so we know that they're going to form the committee.
Okay.
Who might be interested in participating, so I want to do that in an agendized setting.
All right. Well,
Let's just talk about parameters. You want
Okay.
council representation,
Okay.
certain staff representation, you want members of the community involved, or if there's some specific organization or group. And that's the kind of level we ought to be talking about right now, and then come back at a regular agenda and refine that to the specific needs.
well, let's start with how many.
Yeah,
Because we want to keep it small so we get something done. So 6, 7, 5, 5 or 7.
5 to 7.
5 to 7, but no bigger.
5 or 7.
7.
5 or 7.
He's in the middle.
Are we going to ask the police and fire to be party to this committee, or?
They can either be on the committee or provide input to the committee.
Okay, they can provide input otherwise. Okay. Because to me, they're a crucial element. And same with the building department as input, just for building codes and what they would need to see.
I think we would ask staff input based on when we needed the particular area, ask them to come and provide that input, so. I think there should be at least one member who's an advocate for the industry, and perhaps there needs to be yet another advocate who is probably against it. And then the others at large, or something along those lines. That's up to you guys as well.
It might be desirable to have somebody related to the county as well, just because, I think that if we're going to work with the county instead of just be off on our own little reservation, that if they're going to
I think
have...
the opportunity has happened with their group, they didn't ask us, so. I mean, I think we should look to see, I think we can communicate between the city and the county without actually having a member on each individual ad hoc committee.
Yeah, I agree
Okay.
with you.
Well, you're more familiar with the process than I am. So.
What about a medical person?
I think that's
Is that necessary?
ideal. I think it's ideal, actually, between that and law enforcement.
The county,
What I probably encourage the council to do is let staff come back to you with recommendations
Sure.
each week of the meeting.
Okay.
In terms of both the composition, we've had an opportunity to gauge, interest in participation and so on. I think we have some pretty good direction in terms of at least how many council members would be participating and what some advocates and some folks who are not advocates participating. So probably let the city administrator and myself kind of get together and noodle about it, come back with a recommendation to you.
okay.
Sounds good to me.
And I'd like the committee to put together at a fairly early meeting a mission statement or a statement of what the committee is charged to do. Because it sounds like right now we're not sure what timeline we're going at.
Well, I think we can, between Doug and I, we can identify the subject areas that the committee should focus on. And whether the city wants to have dispensaries, whether they're going to just support medical marijuana or do we want to consider recreational use in light of what the federal position might be or is or might be. And uses of cultivation as we're going to see this compared to the county. Is it going to be indoor only, or is it going to be more considered outdoor growing?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
And frame those, get some direction on those broader issues that will then frame the detail of the discussion. Because otherwise it's been,
Exactly.
because there's some key decisions that are direct or wide directions. Once we get past
Okay.
those decision points.
Pull your mic up.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, so we'll come back with structure of the committee and what we see as the critical tasks, decision points that you make. But then there's no point talking about how many plants you're going to grow at 5 square feet if you're not going to let anybody grow the plant.
That's right.
Or how many dispensaries we're going to have if we're not going to allow dispensaries in the city. So we got to get past those viewpoint issues and then get into the detail of what then the regulation should be for those parameters. And we can come up with some suggestions for participation. It certainly wouldn't include all the councils, so they'll be disappointed if you're not one of the 2 or 3 that they can pick. But stay at 7 and pick 5 of the council members. So we'll do that. We'll try to do that by your meeting of the 17th.
All right.
And then the 7 members was what was decided?
No.
No,
5 to
just
7.
5 to 7.
Staff recommendation.
We'll look at that.
Okay. It looks like the next order of business on my agenda is adjournment. So I think you've gotten all the direction that you need?
I think we have more than that.
Well, it's better to have too much than not enough. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the special meeting of the City Council at 7:48. Thank you very much for all of your participation and staying for this long meeting and your interest.
Oh, I know.